Welcome back to the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Last time Samuel spent time in England at his home area, and also did regional shipping around the area between Bristol and Lisbon, with a crew that was either drunk, absconded, or were captured by the press gang. On top of that, his vessel was leaky and in need of repair. I hope you enjoy this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly. About the beginning of May 1794, we sailed for the Downs. After we anchored off Deal, the Hawk, a 20-gun ship, made a signal as a convoy for the westward. I therefore repaired on board, and was introduced to the captain, an uncommon circumstance. After he had asked me a few questions, he left me on the deck to order my instructions. The sailing master, having a little recollection of old times when he was in the merchant service, was attracted towards me, and invited me to the gun-room for refreshments. One of these sea animals from the merchant service is required for every serviceable ship in the Navy, and his responsibility is very great, as there are few transactions in the ship but what he has something to do in. The ship's carcass, clothing, accoutrements, provisions, and seamen are under his immediate care. He berths the ship in the harbor, navigates her at sea, and directs all her movements in battle. After all, he is only considered as a warrant officer, and is often looked on with disdain and contempt by his superiors, who are honored by commissions. This sea monster makes much use of peculiar phrases, many of which are as unintelligible to a landsman as Greek would be to an American Indian, and I have been informed that should he, when on shore, find occasion to have a tooth extracted, he must employ an interpreter, as perhaps he would describe it to be the aftermost grinder aloft on the starboard quarter. A day or two afterwards, the Hawk's topsails were loosed, and she soon after stood to the northward. As she fired no signal guns, we kept fast, observing her motions with astonishment, but supposed she had received counter-orders and therefore slipped away silently. An armed ship without a figurehead now displayed the western signal, and the following morning the fleet sailed. We followed with all our might and strength, but could not overtake the convoy. Neither did she appear to consider it her duty to attend to any merchantmen, but made the best of the wind for Portsmouth. On passing a sloop off the Owers, I inquired of his master if he knew the destination of the armed ship, and as soon as he replied, I discovered it to be the well-known voice of my old persecutor, T.E. As soon as Spithead appeared in sight, I discovered Lord Howe's grand fleet coming out. I therefore ran in amongst them, and looked no more after the late convoy. The wind continued fair till night, when it came to the westward and blew fresh, and as we knew nothing of the signals of this fleet, and as it was very numerous, the East and West Indiamen being under the protection of Lord Howe, I thought it prudent to keep within them during the night. Towards morning the wind was northerly, and when the day broke I found our ship abreast of the Royal Sovereign. Soon after, near the Eddystone, the Plymouth division joined, when Admiral McBride, in the Minotaur, newly painted, ran between us and the commander-in-chief, and they exchanged salutes to my great gratification, being admirably well situated for a view, or rather too near for our safety from the wads of Admiral McBride's guns. As we approached Falmouth, the ships laying there for convoy were getting under sail, frigates having been dispatched the day before to draw out the merchantmen in readiness. The Grand Fleet now shaped a course for Ushant, previous to the action of the 1st of June, while we steered for the Land's End. As we passed the Loo Pool and near Port Leven, I had an opportunity of discovering many spots, houses, and churches well known to me when a schoolboy. Whilst my eyes were roving over the different parishes in view, my memory revived many a happy scene, and caused me to recollect many an unpleasant circumstance. On yonder eminence I often ranged with jovial youths, many of which have long since left the habitation of mortals, and slipped into vast eternity. From the dreadful cliff, whose jutting rocks lurk in ambush to wreck the weather-beaten bark, often have I stood secure to view the shattered fragments of stately vessels dashed upon the beach below, and at its base lays many a grave of gallant seamen. There in that town I have been the dread of one who now sits on the bench of justice, and on that green I have engaged in trifles with another who was afterwards a counsellor. In yon church, on one of the lower hills, for more than 6 long years I heard, once a week, a dry, sluggish lesson on morality. In those fields to the right I have often strayed with many a dear relation now gone to rest, and in those various hamlets still lives many a known face in rural peace and cheerful solitude. Having rounded the sunken rock, Rundlestone, as we opened the Bristol Channel, the northeast wind began to freshen, which soon brought us under low sails. The night was dark and unpleasantly spent by me between the dangerous reef of rocks known by the name of Seven Stones and the longships. The morning following, I observed several vessels bear up for Scilly, and seeing no prospect of doing better, I ordered the helm aweather and steered for St. Helens Gap. Near Round Island, I was happy in getting a pilot on board, and cast my cares to the wind, under an idea that every danger was past. We were now gliding along before the wind and waves with great rapidity, and were got within a few hundred yards of the desired port, with the water there as smooth as a mill pond. We had yet to pass a narrow gut between two large rocks. "Port," says the pilot, but the helmsman's art was now in vain. The wheel rope was jammed by one turn, round the barrel riding on the other. The ship was now rushing apparently on inevitable destruction towards the left-hand crag. The pilot had given himself to despair, exclaiming, "The ship is lost! The ship is lost!" Not so myself. I had long known that a grain of exertion in the time of danger was of more value than a load of unavailing lamentations. I therefore called loudly for a knife, which was instantly handed me by a seaman. The mischievous rope was cut in twain, when seizing on the tiller I pushed it hard to port, and, a kind Providence being the director, the ship immediately answered the helm, and swung clear of Scylla, without running into the Gulf of Charybdis. Had the tiller been in a gun-room, the ship would have been dashed in pieces, as we could not have taken hold of it so quickly. And I never knew that ever the wheel rope got jammed by the parts riding on the barrel, either before or after riding on the barrel, either before or after this period, though I had from time to time been 4 years in this ship. When the tide flowed, we moored farther up the pool and obtained from the pilot some eggs, a small rabbit, and rockfish, but found provisions in general scarce, and the inhabitants very poor. I found a Chepstow shipmaster here of my acquaintance, who undertook to be my guide on shore, he being well acquainted with the people of these islands. In the afternoon we landed on Tresco, and called on an Irish widow who kept a public house, where accommodations were wretched. We ascended the hill above her house, from whence we had a fine view of the Sylvaes, the dry rocks and islands being above 100. This eminence commanded a view of New and Old Grimsby harbors, St. Mary's Road and town, the different sands and bays. The view was both pleasing and terrific, while the inhabitants' details of shipwrecks were melancholy and dreadful. Great complaints were in circulation against a revenue cutter that had captured many smugglers belonging to the islands. But though so many losses had taken place, yet brandy and India handkerchiefs appeared in plenty. Recollecting that I had now an opportunity of procuring a voucher for fresh beef supplied the tender at St. Mary's, I was determined to go in quest of the man who had furnished the beef. My friend Captain N agreed to accompany me, and, as the navigation was critical, even in a boat, from the numerous sunken rocks and shelves, we hired a boat at Tresco with 2 men. We landed on St. Mary's Pier and found the town in a bustle on account of its being muster day, with about 30 invalid soldiers composing the garrison of the chief island. We therefore had an opportunity of observing the army go through their evolutions. On enquiry, I found that the person I wanted, respecting the vouchers, lived on the far side of the island, and as a young man offered to walk with me to the farm, I left my friend in town to order dinner against my return, and departed for the country. As we walked along, we had a fine view of the island of St. Agnes, on which a lighthouse is erected with a reverberating light to distinguish it from the constant light on the longships. Having executed our business, we walked down to the spot where Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel was buried, after losing his ship and his life in the Gillstones, being the western labyrinth of rocks. He was afterwards removed from this island, and afterwards interred in Westminster Abbey, as I recollect having seen a monument erected in that repository of kings, statesmen, heroes, and play actors to his memory. I think the Admiral is laying in a recumbent posture in white marble, and may be known by his dirty face, arising from the juice of tobacco thrown at his face by British tars out of revenge. He having been the first promoter of burgoo in the Navy, a dish of boiled oatmeal seasoned with salt, butter, and sugar, which seamen much dislike. Hearing the commander of the garrison had good potatoes on sale, I ordered 2 or 3 sacks from him. The town of St. Mary's is little better than a large village, and a few good houses therein. They draw many of their necessary articles of food and clothing from the town, and market in Penzance in Cornwall, to which place there is a weekly packet. As the Duke of Leeds has a steward settled here, I imagine much landed property in these islands belongs to him. We got safely to our ships, and the day following we were visited by gentlemen from St. Mary's, with whom we took a walk before dinner on the island of Tresco. I observed one of the company was much disliked at this place, and that he was known here by the name of Satan, of whom the inhabitants were extremely shy. But I did not learn the reason why he was so called, unless he held an office in the customs. We called in at a small public house in the afternoon, and being seated in the parlor, I observed a fine decorated dresser there, on which their fractured china, silver spoons, and cream jug were exhibited to the best advantage. To teach the landlady wisdom, we crammed the silverware into some of the basins, teapots, etc., and there left them, expecting her fright on missing them would cause her to take better care of them when again discovered. We lay at St. Helens 4 or 5 days, and, as our ship was armed with 6 guns and 6 or 8 swivels, the small craft bound for St. George's Channel were watching our sailing to accompany us in hopes of some protection. At last a southerly wind began blowing, which cleared the different harbors. We sailed towards evening, and the next forenoon saw the Irish land within Tusker, and we soon reached Liverpool. I now paid off my drunken mate and crew, and delivered the cargo in good order from an old leaky ship. One of my friends endeavored to persuade me to take a mate's place in Guineaman, the law not allowing the appointment of masters, unless they had previously been either surgeon or mate 2 voyages. This proposal I declined, being well aware of the iniquity practiced in that trade. The Brothers privateer belonging to Mr. 1010 had returned from her cruise. She was now sailed as a letter of marque to cruise in the Bay of Biscay for a given time, and then to proceed to New York to load for Jamaica. Having hauled our ship into the graving docks, I found she was past her prime, and, during her repairs, I had much trouble in keeping the shipwrights at work, for when I was on one side, they were idle on the other. I have often observed suspicious people visiting the bottom of the docks to carry off ironwork, etc., left on purpose by the carpenters, who shared in the spoil. I was once informed by an acquaintance of a custom-house officer that he had in his dwelling a room well stowed with saucepans, kettles, and various other articles taken from vessels on which he was boarded. One of these officers boarded on a West Indiaman seized a small keg of rum from a boy, which he did not take from the ship till dark. The poor lad, not willing to give up his loss quietly, followed the officer at a distance, and saw him stop at his own door with the rum. But not being able to obtain entrance, his wife being from home, he covered the keg with his great coat and repaired to a neighbor's house, probably for the key. As soon as he was out of sight, the boy shouldered the keg and the great coat and bore them off in triumph. And I was further informed that the next day the mate or another person nailed the coat or hung it to the main mast. But as no one thought proper to lay in a claim, it became the boy's property from finding it in the street. I now recollect another set of depredators in Liverpool, viz., the women employed in cleaning ships' cabins previous to their being painted. These ladies I never suffered to come on board but once, having discovered that they made frequent journeys on shore in the day, their petticoats covering many articles that I did not miss till they were paid off. My owners were quite at a loss how to employ the Thetis, and having lost much money by shipping lately, had made them timid and wavering. At length I was questioned whether I had any objection of going to Santo Domingo, as vessels were wanted here to load coffee, etc., for Britain. I did not much like going to a sickly country, but never liking to shrink from duty, I informed them that if it was their desire to send the ship there, I would certainly go in her. This voyage was soon after determined on, and a cargo was to be put on board consigned to my disposal. I was first to proceed to Cape Nicola Mole in Hispaniola, and endeavor to sell the cargo in the various ports in that island, possessed by the British troops, to invest the proceeds in coffee, and take whatever freight might offer for Great Britain. In case of failure, I was ultimately to proceed to Kingston, Jamaica, and do the best in my power. My lodgings were near one of the naval rendezvous, which gave me an opportunity of witnessing an unpleasant transaction. A carpenter had been impressed, and was lodged in the press hole at the bottom of Water Street. This circumstance being communicated to the shipwrights, a large body of the trade assembled at night with a long spar, which they used as a battering ram against the prison door, which soon burst asunder, and all the men within were liberated. They then proceeded to the rendezvous in Strand Street, which they broke open and literally gutted the house, The feathers of the beds were emptied into the streets, and the furniture broken to pieces or carried off as booty, in which business a number of women assisted, as well as in drinking the beer and liquors, and even the windows were demolished. At last a magistrate made his appearance and dispersed the mob. The gang had made good their retreat at the back part of the dwelling. As I lived near the old dock, I was often disturbed at night with riots in Strand Street, a noted place for Irishmen's lodgings and cellars. On Saturday nights especially, the watchman's rattle was well exercised. We had frequently disturbances in our dwelling, occasioned by taking in irregular lodgers who frequently came home drunk at all hours of the night. The next bedchamber to mine was occupied by a well-educated man who was a brandy merchant. This person's time for coming into his lodgings was between 12 and 4 o'clock in the morning. He took his milk breakfast in bed and rose near midday. One earlier hour he knocked at my door and requested that I would turn out to see something curious. I instantly obeyed and repaired into his room, where I found a terrier bitch, belonging to a Guinea captain in the house, had turned off all the upper bedclothes and had deposited her newly born litter on the under sheet to our great diversion. As I had boarded at this house, when in port, for 7 years past, I exerted my influence occasionally to adopt regulations for the control of ill-bred, illiberal lodgers, but, as the inmates were frequently changing, the good I had introduced one voyage was all undone by the time I returned. I had observed that one of the yearly boarders, a great epicure, always placed himself close to the carver's right hand at dinner, and from custom was always helped first to the best. I also observed that this same man forestalled the supper under a pretense that he would not wait till the proper hour. I therefore made a motion to counteract his schemes by requesting a fair chance for each boarder being helped first, in turn, at dinner, and that if any person wanted supper before the usual time, he was to take what was handed him by the servants, without being permitted to select or help himself. And as these regulations were deemed fair, he could do no other but submit. Another time a rare dish was placed before a surgeon of a Guineaman who, being greedy, helped himself to at least 3 people's share. The next day a similar dish was placed near him again, which I took the liberty of removing to the other side, repeating some little pleasantry by way of rebuke, without giving offense, and in this manner I checked many a greedy, ill-behaved lodger. One day a captain of a Guinea ship arrived at our house, and while he was at dinner, a bailiff inquired for him. The mistress of the house, knowing the officer, said the captain was not at home. But an officious servant, to rectify the lie, said, "Is not he sitting there?" He was therefore taken into custody. On inquiry I found that this captain and another, on the coast of Africa, having had some altercation with the natives, the crews of both ships were sent on shore armed at night with their faces blacked, and attacked the village, doing much injury. The natives, being aware of their enemies, repulsed them, and found means to cut off one of the ships. The other captain, who lost his ship afterwards, returned to Liverpool, and being the principal transgressor, the present arrest was at the suit of the underwriters for the recovery of their loss. This captain was liberated after examination, and was afterwards blown up in his ship whilst engaging a French privateer, and I believe most, if not all, of the crew and the cargo of slaves perished. How awful! I now shipped a young mate, no eligible one offering. This young man had a fair character from his late captains, with whom he had served his apprenticeship in the Kingston trade. I soon found in loading the vessel that he was extremely vain, ignorant, and assuming, but I did not know how to better myself, as both mates and seamen were very scarce. As it was wartime, I endeavored to procure a few stout apprentices, but could meet with none but boys under 15 years, 3 of which I engaged, making altogether 4 boys. After laying several weeks at the dock gates, I was permitted to prepare for sea, and as we were armed for a running ship, was allowed to have a puncheon of rum without duty. I now sent the ship into the river with the few men I could muster, and when I could ship another, he was sent on board. But when I had got all but 2, I was completely at a loss. During a whole day's hunt, I could not procure a man. I was therefore, for the first time, obliged to resort to a Jew crimp, to try what he could do for me. He therefore set to work, and I was not a little surprised at seeing a man of his procuring who had refused to go with me, when I had before, in the course of the day, applied to him direct. I now took a carpenter, for the first time since I had been a shipmaster. I hope you enjoyed this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Please like, subscribe, and follow on whatever platform you're listening. Be sure to check out the description to see how you can support this project and others, and tune in next time for more from the Journal of Samuel Kelly.